What the fuck is this piece of shit?
Suppose you are author A. You're approached by a streaming service offering to give your work an anime adaptation, an offer you graciously accept. The decision of which studio takes charge of this adaptation then comes down to you, and you pick one with whom the director is intimately familiar with your work since he has read the novels previously, as well as one that offers you a fair degree of creative control over your series. I suppose you'd be fairly happy with the outcome up to this point, at least until you begin to see the overwhelmingly negative discourse regarding the highly anticipated adaptation of your book series, some of which going so far as to create fake official accounts to dunk on your show, and a petition to cancel the adaptation which would garner close to 50,000 signatures over a couple of weeks. And thus, briefly, is the tale of Turtleby, the author of The Beginning After the End, and his dance with Studio ACAT. To say The Beginning After the End was one of the most highly anticipated manhwa adaptations to date would be a fair assessment. A lot of people were excited, with the novels being very loved and loyally supported from what I've seen. And this series effectively earned itself the sort of nickname in the form of Korea's Mushoku Tensei for its quality and for the author's open admission that the story was heavily inspired by Rifuji Namaganote's masterpiece light novel series. Someone even goes so far as to argue that this was the better written of the two series, while simultaneously declaring it takes 50 chapters to really get there.
You serious?
So with the anticipation running high, a lot of people were looking forward to this right up until the moment the first episode dropped and we saw for ourselves that this was a half-baked creation. Mind you, I myself am an anime only. The novel could very well have been heavily betrayed in all of this, but since the author claims he chose this path for greater creative control and to work with someone who knew his work well, I feel justified in applying some of these critiques to the original works themselves, since the author had some sort of hand in all of this. Given the first two episodes, you could hardly have called this thing an anime. Moments of greater action were often rendered in one of the laziest possible ways I have ever seen, by still framing the events with Filmora speed lines around the edges and pretending like that is some sort of great work. And when presented with episode 2's climactic encounter with bandits out on the road, that trend only continued.
Come on, baby, show me what you got. Show me what, just move. If you got to know it, just move. It's all I want to see, some movement. I'm not seeing enough movement.
This has effectively been the bulk of the discourse online with this show. It's very poorly animated, an issue that likely would not have been a problem were this some sort of random isekai or fantasy. There's some merit to calling people spoiled over animation, since the anime fandom has demonstrated this kind of behavior in the recent past. But this kind of animation is more regular than people seem to think, especially in fantasy and isekai anime, so I'm really not surprised to see it here, since it was in Tokyo Revengers, since it was in Fairy Tail, and a lot of other popular shonens. The fact is that Sakamoto Days similarly caught heat for not living up to the solo leveling quality that Studio A1 put out. But that excuse only goes so far, because the animation would actually have to be somewhat good, like with Sakamoto Days, for that to check out. However, this was a very highly anticipated anime adaptation, and the animation quality is laughable at best. There isn't a touch of interesting work done on the anime, to the point that the manga on my shelves probably has better looking action than whatever is presented in this show. Its quality is indistinguishable from that of a throwaway isekai or fantasy series that any studio could pump out for quick cash. I regret to say that I have touched myself to hentai with better animation than this. That shouldn't be a thing.
Dude, what the hell am I supposed to say after that?
But if that were the only thing that were a problem with this show, it might have been quite a different story. It likely would have still been well accepted, even with the boring animation, if it had no other issues to contend with. You need, however, to keep in mind that this show has so far been keeping itself propped up on the clout of Mushoku Tensei's success. So a similar level of quality was rightly expected. But the allegations would sadly become more obvious when its first episode was nothing but a poorly aped version of Mushoku Tensei Episode 1, right down to the main characters scratching their asses while reading about magic. When I say poorly recreated, I do truly mean that. The characters in this show haven't an ounce of appeal the way that the Grey Rats did. Whether that be due to directing or the original work, the fact is that they are not sold as anywhere as near to being human. Timu Tensei allegations aside, this anime does nothing to make me care about the characters. Arthur, formerly Grey, is a hardened militaristic warrior king reborn into a fantastical world, and his journey is presented as one to come to appreciate family love and kinship, all things he had basically gone without in his first life. That's all well and good on paper, given that this sort of second chance element is what isekai does best. But delivery kind of falls flat because he suddenly finds a heart in episode 1 for whatever reason, and doesn't seem to grapple with his old self in any significant way. We get some flashes of Grey killing a few people to contrast with his life as Arthur, where he's supposedly powerless but can blow up a house all on his own. But never anything that seriously sells the character's budding familial love for his parents and vice versa, nor anything to sell us on a shortcoming of his effectively. His writing feels terribly contrived, same with many of the other characters. Speaking of the parents, the father comes off as a generic buffoon and the mother an airhead, neither of them ever really having a truly special familial moment with their son in the first 3 episodes meant to sell us on this supposed connection that's begun to change Arthur's existing personality to one who cares about others. To the viewer's experience, there's nothing in this show to properly show you why Arthur would begin to change his life, especially not to the point where him attempting to sacrifice himself for his pregnant mother would be a properly compelling moment. And the one time you see Arthur building an actual relationship with someone, it does kind of come off as a bit creepy.
I love kids, Charlie! I love kids!
And then comes episode 3. And while it gives us marginally better animation because there's actually some movement for once, it's almost entirely rendered in poor CGI 3D animation that would get beaten by some Overwatch animatic I could find out on the hub. There are 2 immensely powerful beings in this episode using magic against each other. A battle for the ages, and I feel nothing for it. It is soulless. But the worst of its issues is the fact that it tries yet again to sell us on some sort of personal connection between Sylvia and Arthur that makes no sense to the viewer because your sense of how much time is spent in this alternate dimension is skewed. And on top of all of that, the show ends up basically handing Arthur yet another insane level of power for no other reason than he seems to have decided he loves his family. Which is all well and good if you had spent some time actually developing that point and your audience actually cared about the characters. And there was some sort of reason for him to acquire that power and rush back and use it to save his family. Everything about this show comes across as spectacularly soulless. So I thus far feel justified in calling it Timu Tensei, even though it does take some notable deviations thus far. To bring it around to address that comparison, Mushoku Tensei had a much better onboarding process in the same period of time. Animation, environment, and character designs are phenomenal. The character work is so much smoother, and through very small, minute things, the cast is brought to life in a way that makes you actually interested in them. And for as much talent as Rudy does demonstrate for magic, he still needs a teacher and very clearly lacks sorely in many areas. And in fact, you do actually see him practicing much more than you see Arthur doing any amount of practice. All in all, I'm really not seeing what everyone was saying about this. I'm not seeing how this was supposed to be a contender against something like Mushoku Tensei. It is like someone ripped the bleeding heart out of Rifujine's work and handed me the corpse. It seems the same on the surface level, but has none of the life to it that made it a pleasurable experience. This anime is less of some great tale of a second chance and a change of heart, and more just your usual generic dime a dozen isekai story that gets produced in mass since there are so many of them out there. There isn't a drop of enjoyment to be found in watching this adaptation. The only, and I genuinely mean only, reason that I'm still even here is the fact that many people say it gets better the longer it runs. They swear up and down by this series. Basically, I'm living on a prayer, hoping that this gets better. And perhaps it does, and I perhaps eat my words on this. Good. I'd rather eat my words and have a good anime experience than suffer a bad one and be right. Who cares if this whole video ages poorly? 3 episodes in and I'm still given terrible CGI, slideshows, and stale characters. In the same period of time, the show that this whole thing propped itself up off of gobbling up clout from did better. And so far, fan reception to the show has not been good. As I mentioned, a lot of people have taken to signing a petition to cancel this anime. A petition that will ultimately do no good, as even if it were taken seriously, it really wouldn't change anything. The series would just die and you'd never see it again. Yes, some people genuinely are spoiled by newer animation. There's no doubt about that. But that doesn't somehow magically save this anime from being garbage. It doesn't change the fact that its visual elements are soulless trash. If season 1 doesn't end up turning it around somehow, I will never touch it in this medium again. I'll go straight to the source if I want to know more. It may not be the absolute worst thing ever, because Record of Ragnarok, 7 Deadly Sins, Berserk 2016, a lot of those have much, much worse animation. But it could rightly be called a severe betrayal of expectations and a terrible anime to this point.